Window seat. At least she'd have something to look at during the 3-hour flight from Denver to Atlanta. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos. Kids running between legs, business people typing frantically on laptops, couples arguing over where to eat before their flights. Emily observed it all with the quiet alertness that had become second nature after 15 years in the Air Force. "Looks like we're delayed again," said the man behind her, more to himself than to her. "Weather in Denver is always trouble this time of year." Emily nodded politely but didn't engage further. She'd learned long ago that conversations on planes usually led to the inevitable question, "So what do you do?" And that question always led to explanations she preferred to avoid. The truth was both simple and complicated. Until 3 years ago, she had been Captain Emily Reeves, one of the first female test pilots for the experimental X-47 program. Her call sign, Nighthawk, was known throughout certain military circles. Now at 42, she worked as a flight safety consultant helping airlines update their emergency protocols. Protocols she had helped write during her military career. The line finally started moving. Emily adjusted her simple black backpack and followed the slow shuffle toward the plane. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother. "Landed yet?" Mom's asking. Emily typed back quickly. "Delayed. Tell her I'll call when I get to the hotel." The jetway felt stuffy like it always did. Emily had boarded hundreds of flights, but something about the liminal space between terminal and aircraft always made her feel slightly claustrophobic. Not that anyone would notice. Her face remained calm, her breathing steady. The military had taught her to compartmentalize discomfort. "Welcome aboard," said the flight attendant at the door, a woman about Emily's age with tired eyes and a practiced smile. Emily made her way down the aisle, dodging elbows and bags. Seat 20D was halfway down the plane, just behind the wing. She preferred this spot, far enough from the engines to avoid the worst noise, but with a good view of the wing mechanics. Old habits died hard. A young mother struggled to settle 2 small children in the row across from Emily. The kids, probably around 5 and 7, were overtired and fussy. Emily caught the mother's eye and smiled sympathetically. "First time flying with them?" Emily asked. The woman nodded, looking overwhelmed. "Their dad usually handles the travel part, but he's not in the picture anymore." "Window seats are good for kids," Emily said. "Give them something to look at. And if you need an extra hand during the flight, I'm right here." The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thanks, I'm Lisa, by the way." Emily. A simple exchange, but it felt good to make a connection. Emily had spent too many years in isolation, focused on her career. Her therapist kept telling her to practice normal social interactions. Not everyone is a subordinate or superior officer, Dr. Chen had reminded her last session. Try just being a person. The plane filled slowly. A teenage boy took the aisle seat in Emily's row, immediately putting in earbuds and closing his eyes. The middle seat remained empty as the last passengers boarded, a small mercy on a full flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, this is Captain Rodriguez from the flight deck. We're looking at about a 45-minute delay due to thunderstorms moving through the area. We'll keep you updated as we get more information from air traffic control." Emily settled into her seat, pulling out the thriller novel she'd been trying to finish for weeks. The work conference had been exhausting. 5 days of talking about airline safety procedures with executives who saw them as expenses rather than necessities. But she'd made progress. 2 major airlines had agreed to implement her updated training programs. She glanced out the window at the darkening sky. The weather looked worse than the captain had indicated. Emily could spot the distinctive anvil-shaped clouds of a severe thunderstorm system moving in from the west. They'd be lucky to take off in 45 minutes. As if confirming her thoughts, the captain's voice came over the speakers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just received an update. Our departure has been pushed back another 30 minutes. The flight attendants will be coming through with water while we wait." A collective groan went through the cabin. The children across the aisle began whining louder. Lisa looked increasingly stressed. "Hey," Emily called softly to the kids. "Did you know airplanes can fly through clouds?" The younger child looked at her with wide eyes. Really? And the pilot can see in the dark using special instruments like a superhero with X-ray vision." The explanation was simplistic, but it worked. Both children turned their attention to Emily, momentarily forgetting their discomfort. "Are you a pilot?" the older child asked. Emily hesitated. I used to be. Now I just ride on planes like everyone else. Did you fly fighter jets? The boy's eyes lit up. Something like that, Emily said with a small smile. She didn't mention the experimental aircraft or the classified missions. Those stories weren't for sharing, especially not with children who would inevitably ask more questions. Lisa mouthed a silent thank you, as her children were temporarily distracted. An hour passed before the plane finally pushed back from the gate. The delay had made everyone restless. The teenager next to Emily had fallen asleep, his head occasionally bobbing toward her shoulder before he'd jerk awake. The cabin felt stuffy despite the air vents running at full blast. As they taxied toward the runway, Emily felt the familiar flutter in her stomach. Not nervousness, anticipation. Despite everything, she still loved the moment of takeoff, the power of acceleration, the delicate balance of physics that lifted tons of metal into the sky. The plane paused at the runway threshold. Emily could picture what was happening in the cockpit. Final checks, communication with the tower, the captain's hand on the throttle. Then they were moving again, faster and faster, until the nose lifted and the ground fell away. Emily watched through her window as Denver shrank beneath them. The plane banked steeply to the right, likely adjusting course to avoid the worst of the storm system. They climbed through a layer of clouds, the aircraft buffeting slightly in the turbulent air. Most passengers gripped their armrests during these moments, but Emily remained relaxed. She knew exactly what was happening. The pilots following standard procedure for weather avoidance. Nothing unusual or concerning. The fasten seatbelt sign remained illuminated longer than normal as they continued to climb through rough air. When they finally broke through the cloud layer into clear sky, a few passengers applauded. Emily never understood that reaction. The pilots were just doing their job. The flight attendants began their service once the plane leveled off at cruising altitude. Emily declined the offered beverages and snacks, preferring to return to her book. But concentration was difficult. Despite her exhaustion, her mind kept drifting back to the conference. One airline executive had asked a question that still bothered her. What's the point of training for scenarios that almost never happen? Emily had given her standard answer about preparedness and worst-case scenarios. What she hadn't said was that she'd lived through one of those almost never happens situations. She still had nightmares about the experimental aircraft losing hydraulic pressure at 40,000 feet. The systems failing one by one, the ground rushing up too fast. Her training had saved her life that day. The emergency procedures she'd drilled hundreds of times had become automatic, allowing her to land an aircraft that, by all technical standards, should have been unflyable. That experience had shaped everything she'd done since, including the safety protocols she now taught to commercial pilots. She knew firsthand that when the impossible happened, training made the difference between life and death. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, jerking Emily from her thoughts. Across the aisle, the children squealed, half frightened, half excited. Lisa looked pale. It's normal, Emily assured her. Just air currents, like driving over a bumpy road. The simplification seemed to help. Lisa nodded gratefully. Ladies and gentlemen, came the captain's voice. We're experiencing some light turbulence as we navigate around a weather system. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign as a precaution. Please return to your seats. Emily glanced out her window again. The sky ahead looked darker than it should. The storm system must have expanded since their departure. She'd been on enough flights to recognize when pilots were downplaying situations to avoid alarming passengers. This wasn't light turbulence, they were heading into something significant. As if to confirm her assessment, the plane dropped suddenly, then rose again. A few passengers gasped. The teenager next to Emily finally took out his earbuds, looking concerned. Is this normal? He asked her. Completely, Emily replied, her voice steady and confident. The pilots see the turbulence on their radar and know exactly how to handle it. She didn't mention her growing concern about the storm's intensity or the fact that the pilots had likely chosen to fly through part of it, rather than burning extra fuel to go completely around it. A standard airline practice that had always bothered her from a safety perspective. The plane shuddered again. Emily closed her book. She wouldn't be reading anymore on this flight. Instead, she found herself listening carefully to the engines, feeling the subtle vibrations through the floor, watching the wing flex outside her window. Everything was still operating normally. The turbulence grew worse. Emily watched the wing flex more dramatically as the plane bumped through dark clouds. Most passengers had gone quiet, gripping armrests or closing their eyes. The only sounds were the rumble of engines, the creak of the aircraft's frame, and an occasional whimper from the children across the aisle. Emily leaned across to Lisa and her kids. "Hey there," she said to the wide-eyed little ones. "You know what pilots call this? They call it washing machine air. The plane is tough enough to handle it." The older child nodded bravely while the younger one buried his face in his mother's side. Lisa shot Emily a grateful look. "Have you been through worse?" Lisa asked quietly. Emily thought back to test flights through thunderstorms that made this look like a gentle ride, to emergency scenarios deliberately created to push aircraft to their limits. "Yes," she said simply. "Much worse." The plane dropped again, more severely this time. Overhead bins popped open. A few unsecured items, a water bottle, someone's hat, a tablet, went flying. A flight attendant who had been trying to reach her jump seat stumbled and fell into a passenger's lap. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice was tense, despite his obvious effort to sound calm, "we're experiencing some significant turbulence. All flight attendants, please take your seats immediately. Everyone else must remain seated with seatbelts fastened tightly." Emily's internal alarm bells started ringing. The captain hadn't mentioned how long the turbulence would last or given any reassurances about changing altitude to find smoother air. Either they were stuck in this weather system with no way around it, or something else was happening. She glanced at her watch. They'd been flying for about an hour. Somewhere below them would be Kansas or Missouri, flat terrain but few large airports capable of handling an emergency landing from a plane this size. If the pilots needed to divert, their options would be limited. The cabin lights flickered. A few passengers gasped. Emily looked out her window again, studying the wing. The aircraft shook violently, but the wing was doing what it was designed to do, flexing to absorb the stress rather than braking. What concerned her more was a subtle change in engine sound. Most passengers wouldn't notice it over the noise of the turbulence, but Emily's trained ear caught the slight irregularity in the hum of the right engine. A new voice came over the intercom, younger, less confident. "The co-pilot. Folks, we're working to get above this weather. Air traffic control is helping us find a smoother route. We appreciate your patience," Emily frowned. The change in spokesperson was unusual. Typically, the captain handled all passenger communications during difficult situations to maintain a sense of authority and calm. The co-pilot taking over could mean the captain was busy dealing with something more urgent than passenger comfort. The teenager beside Emily had gone pale. "Are we going to crash?" he whispered. "No," Emily said firmly. "Modern aircraft can handle much worse than this. The pilots know exactly what they're doing." She hoped that was true. The irregular engine sound was becoming more pronounced, a subtle vibration that didn't match the left engine's steady rhythm. Emily had felt this exact sensation before, during a test flight when foreign object damage had affected an engine's performance. It wasn't critical yet, but it needed attention. The turbulence suddenly intensified beyond anything they'd experienced so far. The plane seemed to drop from beneath them, then jerked upward with such force that anyone not belted in would have hit the ceiling. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments as the cabin pressure warning sounded. "Put your mask on first. Then help your children," Emily called to Lisa, demonstrating the proper technique with her own mask. Around them, passengers were panicking, some struggling with their masks, others crying or praying. The teenager beside Emily fumbled with shaking hands. She helped him secure his mask before checking that Lisa and her children were properly equipped. Through the window, Emily could see they were still inside the storm clouds, lightning occasionally illuminating the darkness. The right engine's vibration had worsened. Even more concerning, she could now detect the distinctive sound of hydraulic pressure fluctuating, a potential sign of system failure. A flight attendant moved carefully down the aisle, checking passengers. When she reached Emily's row, Emily gestured for her to come closer. "What's happening up front?" Emily asked, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask but calm and authoritative. The flight attendant hesitated. Most passengers asking questions during emergencies wanted reassurance, not information. But something about Emily's demeanor, her composed expression, her direct gaze, signaled that she wasn't most passengers. "We've got multiple issues," the attendant said quietly. "I can't say more. Emily made a decision." She pulled her wallet from her pocket and removed an identification card. Not her driver's license, but her flight safety consultant credentials with her military background listed. "I'm a former Air Force pilot with experience in emergency situations," she said, showing the card. "If there's anything I can do to help, tell the flight crew." The attendant's eyes widened slightly. She nodded and continued down the aisle, moving more quickly now. 5 minutes passed. The oxygen masks were still hanging, which meant the cabin pressure hadn't fully stabilized. The turbulence had lessened somewhat, but the right engine's irregular sound had become a concerning stutter. Emily could tell they were losing altitude gradually, not diving, but definitely descending at a rate that suggested it might be intentional. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're working through some systems issues. Please keep your oxygen masks on and remain seated. Our flight attendants are here to assist you." Systems issues, a deliberately vague term that could mean anything from minor electrical problems to catastrophic failures. Combined with the captain's continued absence from communications, Emily's concern deepened. The lead flight attendant appeared beside Emily's seat. "Ma'am, could you come with me, please?" Emily unbuckled and stood carefully, holding on to seats for balance as the plane continued to shake. The teenage boy looked at her with alarm. "It's okay," she assured him. "I'm going to see if I can help." Following the flight attendant toward the front of the plane, Emily noticed details that confirmed her suspicions. The tight expressions of the crew, the way another attendant was discreetly checking emergency equipment, the slight downward tilt of the cabin floor indicating their continued descent. The attendant stopped at the galley area just behind the cockpit. "The captain's ill," she said quietly. "Some kind of medical emergency. The first officer is handling the aircraft, but we're having mechanical issues too. He asked if you could, advise." This was highly unusual. Involving a passenger in flight operations went against all standard protocols. Things must be worse than Emily had thought. "What kind of mechanical issues?" Emily asked. "Right engine is damaged, probably from hail. And there's some kind of hydraulic problem affecting the controls." The first officer said they're getting sluggish. Emily knew exactly what that meant. Hydraulic systems controlled the aircraft's primary flight surfaces. Sluggish controls could quickly become no controls at all. "Has he declared an emergency with air traffic control?" The attendant nodded. "We're trying to reach Kansas City, but he's not sure we'll make it. There's a smaller airport closer, but weather conditions are bad there too." Emily took a deep breath. "Tell him I'm available if he needs me. My background is primarily military aircraft, but the systems are similar." The attendant disappeared into the cockpit. Emily waited, her mind racing through potential scenarios and solutions. Damaged engine, hydraulic issues, incapacitated captain, bad weather. Any one of these problems would be serious. Combined, they created a critical situation. The cockpit door opened. The first officer looked out, his face tense but his voice controlled as he spoke to Emily. "I understand you have flight experience?" "Yes," Emily replied. 15 years Air Force, including experimental aircraft testing and emergency procedure development. His expression changed slightly, a flash of recognition. "Military call sign?" It was an unusual question in this context, but Emily understood why he was asking. Call signs were a shorthand way of establishing credentials and experience level. "Nighthawk," she said. The first officer's eyes widened. "Captain Emily Nighthawk Reeves? The X-47 test pilot?" Emily nodded, surprised to be recognized. "That was a while ago." "Ma'am, I trained on your emergency protocols. Your work on hydraulic failure recovery procedures is standard curriculum now." He glanced back into the cockpit, then at Emily. "We've got a situation I could use your input on. The captain's had some kind of medical event, possibly a heart attack. He's stable but unconscious. I've got decreasing hydraulic pressure in System A and B, sluggish control response. Engine 2 is damaged and losing power, and the nearest suitable airport is 20 minutes away through more bad weather." Emily absorbed this information quickly. "May I see the instrument readings?" The first officer hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Please." The cockpit was eerily quiet compared to the anxious murmurs from the passenger cabin. Emily scanned the instrument panel, taking in the situation. Warning lights glowed for the right engine and both hydraulic systems. The radar screen showed the storm system still surrounding them, though they appeared to be nearing its edge. "First, let's make sure we're on the same page," Emily said, settling into the captain's seat. She didn't touch the controls. That would be illegal and unnecessary with a qualified pilot still flying. You've declared an emergency? Yes, the first officer nodded. His name tag read Reynolds. Kansas City approach has cleared us for priority landing, but we're still 20 minutes out if we can maintain this heading and altitude. Emily studied the hydraulic pressure gauges. System A is dropping too fast. At this rate, we'll lose it completely in 10 minutes. Reynolds' jaw tightened. That's what I calculated too. What's our backup airport? Columbia Regional. It's closer, about 12 minutes at our current speed. But they've got lower visibility, and their longest runway is only 6,500 feet. Emily did the mental calculations. For an aircraft this size, with one engine damaged and partial hydraulic failure, 6,500 feet was cutting it close, very close. But if they lost hydraulics completely before reaching Kansas City, let me see the approach charts for both, she requested. Reynolds pulled them up on the display screen. Emily studied the layouts, mentally visualizing the approaches while considering their aircraft's compromised state. The captain, she said, glancing at the unconscious man secured in his seat. Any change? Flight attendant checked 2 minutes ago. He's stable but unresponsive. Blood pressure is low, Emily nodded. They had multiple emergencies happening simultaneously. The captain's health, the failing hydraulics, the damaged engine, and the continuing weather issues. She needed to prioritize. Let's contact Kansas City again, she said. I want updated weather for both airports. Reynolds made the call while Emily continued analyzing the systems. The right engine's vibration had worsened. Metal fatigue from the hail damage was likely progressing. Meanwhile, the hydraulic pressure in System A had dropped another 10%. Kansas City approach, this is Delta 1372, Reynolds said into his headset, requesting current weather conditions for both Kansas City International and Columbia Regional. The controller's voice came back immediately. Delta 1372, Kansas City weather currently showing ceiling 900 feet, visibility 2 miles and heavy rain, wind 220 at 25 gusting 35. Columbia reporting ceiling 100 feet, visibility 3 miles, wind 210 at 18 gusting 28. Reynolds looked at Emily. Both options were challenging, but Columbia's slightly better visibility and less severe winds were significant given their mechanical issues. There's something else to consider, Emily said quietly. If we lose hydraulics completely, we'll have very limited control authority. The shorter distance to Columbia could make the difference between reaching a runway or not. Reynolds nodded. He understood the implications. What would you do? Divert to Columbia, Emily said without hesitation. We can make 6,500 feet work. The risk of total hydraulic failure before reaching Kansas City is too great. Reynolds took a deep breath and turned back to his radio. Kansas City approach, Delta 1372 is requesting to divert to Columbia Regional due to worsening hydraulic issues. Copy that. Delta 1372. Turn right heading 175, descend and maintain 15,000 feet. Columbia approach will be standing by on frequency 124.65. As Reynolds adjusted their course, Emily addressed another pressing issue. We need to prepare the cabin. How many flight attendants do you have? 4. I'll brief the lead on our situation. We'll need to prepare for a potential emergency landing. Reynolds nodded, his hands steady on the controls despite the gravity of the situation. Thank you for being here, Captain Reeves. I recognize your name from training. Your procedures for the Ankara incident saved lives. Emily felt a flash of surprise. The Ankara incident had been a military transport with hydraulic failure that she'd helped land safely 5 years ago. She hadn't realized commercial pilots studied it. Just doing my job, she said. Like you're doing now. She pressed the intercom button. This is the flight deck calling the lead flight attendant. A moment later, a voice responded. This is Diane. Diane, we need you at the flight deck, please. While they waited, Emily continued monitoring the hydraulic pressure. System A was now below 50%, dangerously low. System B was holding at 72%, which gave them some redundancy. But if they lost both, they'd be down to mechanical backup systems only. The cockpit door opened, and the lead flight attendant appeared. Her professional composure couldn't entirely hide her concern as she took in the scene. The unconscious captain, Emily in his seat, the warning lights on the panel. We're diverting to Columbia Regional Airport, Emily explained calmly. We'll be landing in approximately 12 minutes. I need you to prepare the cabin for a potential emergency landing." Diane's eyes widened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "How serious is it?" "We have multiple systems issues, and they're getting worse. The landing will be challenging. We may need to evacuate after touchdown." Reynolds added, "Tell the other attendants, but keep the announcement to passengers brief. Just say we're making an unscheduled landing due to mechanical issues and weather." Diane nodded. "I understand. Anything else they should know?" Emily considered this carefully. "Tell them there may be unusual noises and movement before landing. That's normal under these circumstances." After Diane left, Reynolds switched frequencies to contact Columbia Approach. "Columbia Approach, this is Delta 1372, emergency aircraft inbound, descending through 18,000 for 15,000. A new controller's voice responded immediately. "Delta 1372, Columbia Approach. We copy your emergency. You're cleared direct to Columbia Regional. Descend at your discretion to 5,000 feet. Emergency equipment will be standing by. Can you state the nature of your emergency and number of souls on board?" Reynolds glanced at Emily before responding. "Columbia Approach, we have 142 souls on board. We have an incapacitated captain, damage to the right engine, and progressive hydraulic failure affecting flight controls." There was a brief pause before the controller replied. "Copy all, Delta 1372. Do you have a qualified pilot assisting?" Reynolds looked at Emily again. This was unusual territory. She wasn't part of the authorized flight crew. But these were unusual circumstances. "Columbia Approach, we have a passenger assisting who is a former military pilot. Call sign Nighthawk." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Delta 1372, did you say call sign Nighthawk is on board?" "Affirmative," Reynolds replied. "Stand by, Delta 1372. Emily raised an eyebrow. Her call sign was known in military circles, but she hadn't expected it to mean anything to civilian air traffic control. The controller's voice returned, now with a different tone. "Delta 1372, we have a controller here who recognized that call sign. We're implementing special handling procedures for your aircraft. You are now our priority traffic." Emily felt a mix of surprise and embarrassment. The Ankara incident must have made more waves than she'd realized. Or perhaps it was her work on emergency protocols that had spread her reputation beyond military channels. Reynolds gave her a quick glance that showed both respect and relief. "Seems you're famous," he said quietly. "Infamous, maybe," Emily replied, keeping her focus on the instruments. The right engine's performance was deteriorating further, and hydraulic system A had dropped to 35%. "We need to go through the emergency checklist for hydraulic failure." They worked methodically through the procedures, their movements efficient and coordinated as if they'd flown together for years. Emily read out the checklist items while Reynolds confirmed each action, both of them fully aware of how quickly their situation was changing. As they descended through 12,000 feet, they finally broke free of the storm clouds. Below them, the Missouri landscape appeared, dark with rain but visible. The improved visibility was a small victory. Emily studied the approach path on the display. Columbia's runway 20 would give them the full 6,500 feet. But the approach would be tricky with the crosswind. System A hydraulic pressure dropped to 20%, essentially failed. "We're on System B only now," Emily observed. "Let's switch to manual reversion on the affected controls while we still have some pressure." Reynolds nodded, making the adjustments. The aircraft response became noticeably heavier as they lost the hydraulic assistance, but it remained controllable. Through the cockpit door, they could hear Diane making the announcement to passengers. Her voice was calm and professional, but Emily knew the people in the cabin would be frightened. She thought of Lisa and her children, the teenager who had been sitting next to her. "Columbia Regional in sight, 10 o'clock. 15 miles, Reynolds reported. Emily could see it too, the airport appearing through the rain as they descended through 8,000 feet. The radio crackled. "Delta 1372, you're cleared for the ILS approach runway 20. Wind 210 at 20, gusting 30. Emergency vehicles in position." "Copy that," Reynolds responded. "Request crash equipment along the entire runway. We may need to evacuate after stopping. Equipment will be in position, Delta 1372. The aircraft slammed onto the rain-soaked runway, the impact jolting everyone on board. With the right engine dead and hydraulics failing, the plane immediately tried to veer off course. Reynolds wrestled with the controls while Emily managed the thrust reverser on the working left engine. "Keep it straight," Emily said calmly, though inside she felt anything but calm. "We've got 6,000 feet remaining." The aircraft shuddered violently, skidding slightly as Reynolds fought to keep it centered on the runway. Without full hydraulic pressure, the brakes were losing efficiency. The rain made the runway slick, reducing their stopping power even further. "Hydraulic system B dropping rapidly," Emily announced, watching the gauge plummet toward zero. "We're going to lose nose wheel steering." Reynolds nodded grimly, his arms straining against the controls. "Speed 120 knots. 5,000 feet remaining." Emily pulled the emergency brake handle. Emergency braking engaged. The deceleration pressed them forward against their harnesses. In the cabin behind them, unsecured items would be flying forward, passengers straining against their seatbelts. Emily hoped Diane and her crew had prepared everyone properly. "100 knots, Reynolds called out. 4,000 feet remaining. They were slowing, but not quickly enough. Without both engines' thrust reversers and with compromised brakes, they needed every inch of the runway. 80 knots, Reynolds continued. 3,000 feet remaining. Emily could see the end of the runway approaching too quickly. "Full left engine reverse thrust," she ordered, though Reynolds was already doing exactly that. The aircraft shuddered again as hydraulic system B failed completely. The brake pressure dropped immediately. Now they had only mechanical backup systems, enough to slow them, but far less effective than the hydraulic brakes. "Brace for overrun," Emily said, reaching for the radio. "Columbia Tower, Delta 1372, be advised we may overrun the runway." 60 knots, Reynolds called. 4,500 feet remaining. They both knew it wasn't enough distance. The end of the runway was coming fast with grass and a perimeter fence beyond. But the alternative, attempting a go-around with one failed engine and no hydraulics, would be catastrophic. Emily looked for options. To their left was a taxiway that branched off at an angle. It offered extra distance, but making the turn with no hydraulics and failing brakes would be extremely difficult. "Can you make that left turn onto the taxiway?" she asked Reynolds. He assessed it quickly. "Maybe. Better than running off the end." "Do it." Reynolds used every ounce of strength to turn the aircraft left as they approached the taxiway intersection. The plane responded sluggishly, the nose wheel turning without hydraulic assistance. 40 knots, he called out. Beginning turn. The aircraft lurched as it began to change direction, the momentum trying to carry it straight ahead. For a terrifying moment, Emily thought they would skid off the runway anyway, but Reynolds' skill prevailed. The aircraft made the turn, barely staying on the pavement. The taxiway gave them precious additional space to decelerate. 20 knots, Reynolds announced as the aircraft finally slowed to a manageable speed. They rolled to a stop halfway down the taxiway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound their heavy breathing and the patter of rain on the cockpit windows. "Nice flying," Emily said finally. Reynolds exhaled slowly. "Couldn't have done it without your help, Captain Reeves." Emergency vehicles were already speeding toward them, lights flashing through the rain. Emily hit the cabin intercom. "This is the flight deck. We're safely on the ground. Remain seated with seatbelts fastened until further instructions." She turned to Reynolds. "We should prepare for evacuation. That right engine could be a fire risk." Reynolds nodded and began the emergency shutdown procedures while Emily contacted the rescue crews. "Columbia ground. Delta 1372. We have a medical emergency on board, the captain. We also need to inspect the right engine for possible fire risk before determining if evacuation is necessary." "Copy that. Delta 1372. Emergency medical personnel are approaching your aircraft now. Fire crews will inspect the engine." Diane appeared at the cockpit door. "Everyone's okay back there." "Scared but okay." "Good work," Emily told her. "We're assessing whether we need to evacuate. Stand by for instructions." Outside, fire trucks positioned themselves around the right engine. Crew members in protective gear began inspecting the damaged engine, while others deployed mobile stairs to the forward door. A firefighter's voice came over the radio. "Delta 1372, this is Columbia Fire. Your right engine has structural damage but no signs of fire. We recommend normal deplaning for passengers. Medical team is ready for your captain." "Copy that," Reynolds responded. "We'll begin normal deplaning once the stairs are in position." Emily stood, suddenly aware of how tense her body had been during the ordeal. I should get back to my seat. Let the real crew handle it from here. Reynolds looked up at her. You are the real crew, Captain Reeves. As far as I'm concerned, you were essential flight personnel today. The compliment caught her off guard. Just doing what anyone with my training would do. With all due respect, that's not true, Reynolds said firmly. Your call sign is known for a reason. Before Emily could respond, medical personnel entered the cockpit. 2 paramedics moved efficiently to assess the unconscious captain. Pulse is steady but weak, one reported. Blood pressure is 90/60. Possible cardiac event. They transferred the captain onto a collapsible stretcher, attaching an IV and oxygen mask. Emily and Reynolds watched as they carefully maneuvered him out of the cockpit. Diane returned. We're ready to begin deplaning through the forward door. Should I make an announcement? Reynolds nodded. Yes, normal deplaning. Ask everyone to leave their belongings and move quickly but calmly. As Diane returned to the cabin, Reynolds turned to Emily. You should go first. The airport manager and probably some airline officials will want to speak with you. Emily shook her head. I'd rather stay anonymous if possible. I'll deplane with the regular passengers. Reynolds looked skeptical. That might be difficult. Your call sign has already made quite an impression on the ground. Emily sighed. She'd spent years after leaving the military building a quiet consulting career, deliberately staying out of the spotlight. Today had changed that. She made her way back through the aircraft to her original seat. Passengers looked at her with curious expressions. They'd seen her called to the front during the crisis but didn't know why. The teenager who'd sat beside her was white-faced but managed a weak smile. You helped, didn't you? He asked. With the landing. Emily nodded slightly. The pilots did the real work. Across the aisle, Lisa was holding her children close. Thank you, she mouthed when she caught Emily's eye. The deplaning began shortly after. As passengers filed slowly toward the exit, Emily hung back, hoping to blend in with the crowd. But as she reached the door, Reynolds was waiting. The airport manager is asking for you specifically, he said quietly. And there are some airline executives on the phone who want to speak with you as soon as possible. Emily stepped out onto the mobile stairs. The rain had eased to a drizzle. On the tarmac below, a small group of airport officials waited, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. A woman in an airport management uniform stepped forward as Emily reached the bottom of the stairs. Captain Reeves? I'm Helen Taylor, Airport Director. On behalf of everyone at Columbia Regional, thank you for your assistance today.